Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Ghana ramps up for next week's presidential polls, in which the incumbent, Nana Akufo-Addo, goes up against his predecessor, John Dramani Mahama. Whoever wins will serve their final term in one of Africa's most solid democracies. Also, 300 descendants of Ethiopian Jews fleeing the war at homeland in Israel. They're members of the Falashmira. The new arrivals receive a rousing welcome, but the more established Ethiopian-Israeli community says it's faced discrimination and abuse. And around 10 million people with disabilities live in DR Congo. That's about 1 in 8 of the population. Most get no support from the government, but a bill making its way through Parliament aims to up the community's visibility in public life. But first, Ghana is ramping up for presidential elections that, despite there being 12 candidates in the running, it's really, in reality, a two-horse race between incumbent Nana Akufo-Addo and his predecessor, John Dramani Mahama. The winner will be serving their second and final term in the top job. Unlike in many less stable democracies, the vote is expected to go smoothly. It's the country's 8th successive election. The country has thrived since multi-party democracy was ushered in through the 1992 constitution. Last year, its economy boomed, enjoying 6.5% growth in GDP. 2020 has been a tough period for everyone, but it is unlikely to end Ghana's success story. Sam Bradpeace is in Accra for us. He tells us more.
In 1957, Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African country to gain independence from European colonization. What followed were decades of one-party rule, interspersed sometimes with bloody coups d'etat. But in 1992, things changed. A new constitution ushered in multi-party democracy, and what followed was a long period of stability and economic boom. Millions were lifted from poverty as the country thrived through exports of gold, oil and cocoa, as well as strong governance and a strong industrial sector. We spoke to one of the country's top political scientists who explained the secrets of Ghana's success. She put it down to notably strong institutions, strong political leadership, and an overall sense of faith and trust in the democratic process from Ghanaians themselves.
There's an argument in democratic theory that, richer countries or wealthier countries tend to have democracy, and that democracy can be sustained when you have a larger middle class. But in Ghana, despite the fact that we don't really have a large middle class, even the people of poor standing have all, really signified high interest and high preference for democracy.
But no democracy is perfect. Just last month, the country's special prosecutor charged with tackling corruption resigned. And according to campaigners, the problem of corruption in Ghana is endemic.
Corruption is the biggest problem we actually face in this country. I mean, it's what robs the people of the resources that is meant to improve their lives. So it's the biggest governance problem that we face in the country at the moment.
Former President John Mahama lost the last election in part because of a raft of corruption scandals and allegations. This time around, he's competing for power once again and is trying to paint the incumbent president, Akufo-Addo, in the exact same light.
Well, Sam Bradpeace will be following the elections for us from Ghana, so do tune in to Eye on Africa if you want the latest. Well, Ghana is also the world's #2 cocoa supplier. Ivory Coast is #1. Their cocoa boards have released a joint letter publicly accusing US chocolate multinationals Mars and Hershey of reneging on a deal to pay poor farmers more fairly for their crops. In 2019, the companies agreed to the Living Income Differential, or LID, in which they would pay $400 above market price for each ton of cocoa bought. The African boards now say that the firms have changed their purchasing methods to sidestep these obligations. Condemning this as a breach of faith, they've cancelled schemes that allowed Mars and Hershey to claim that their products are ethically produced. Now, the EU's crisis envoy has called on Ethiopia to end a communications blackout in Tigray and called for both sides to cease hostilities. Federal troops had been battling fighters of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front for over 3 weeks after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military operation. Tens of thousands of refugees have fled to Sudan, and many have not been able to get in touch with those left behind. Sudanese forces have also claimed that Ethiopian troops have been stopping refugees from crossing over the border. Abiy said that the conflict was over after the Tigrayan capital of Mekele was seized over the weekend. The TPLF, however, have vowed to keep fighting. Hundreds of Ethiopians fleeing the war at home landed in Israel on Thursday. Now, they're members of the Falashmira, descendants of Ethiopian Jews, many of whom were forced to convert to Christianity in the 18th and 19th centuries. Tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews emigrated to Israel in the 1980s under the country's law of return, which guarantees Israeli citizenship to all Jews. Whilst the Falashmira community has grown in the country, the experience for many has often been difficult. Brian Quinn has more.
A warm welcome for these new Israelis. Some 300 Ethiopian immigrants landed at Ben Gurion Airport Thursday to begin their new lives. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on hand with an emotional speech to mark the occasion.
The
arrivals all belong to the Falashmira community, descendants of Jews believed to have arrived in Ethiopia 3,000 years ago from the Kingdom of Solomon. Many converted to Christianity, either freely during proselytizing drives in the 19th and 20th centuries, or under duress amid persecution by the country's Christian majority. It wasn't until 1973 that Israeli rabbinical authorities decided Ethiopian Jews were covered by the country's 1950 law of return, thus guaranteeing them citizenship. Most were brought to Israel in the 1980s and early 90s. Their community has now grown to 140,000 strong, but faces poverty and racial discrimination, with many complaints of abuse by Israeli police. The Falashmira, by contrast, have had to rely on a family reunification program requiring special approval. In 2015, the government approved the resettlement of about 9,000 Falashmira claimants, then reversed the decision on budgetary grounds. Much of the remaining community lives in camps in the Amhara region of Ethiopia, dangerously close to recent fighting between the federal government and rebels in neighboring Tigray. Netanyahu has been a key supporter of their cause. Some 1,700 Falashmira are expected to arrive in Israel by the end of January.
Central African Republic's Constitutional Court has rejected the candidacy of former President Francois Bozizé for this month's elections. Now, he was barred because he's subject to UN sanctions and an international arrest warrant that was filed by Bangui in 2014. Bozizé seized power in 2003 before being overthrown a decade later in a coup that exacerbated the country's instability. Incumbent Faustin Archange Touadéra now has a strong shot at winning a second term in the December 27th vote. And Thursday, December 3rd, is the UN International Disability Day. Now, around 10 million people with disabilities live in DR Congo. That's about 1 in 8 of the population. Many have been victims of accidents and violent conflict or preventable diseases like polio. Most get no support from the government. But a new bill currently making its way through Parliament aims to change that. Our correspondents tell us more.
Meet Olivier Bakweto. He contracted polio when he was 2 and lost the use of both his legs. For him, life is an everyday struggle. The difficulties begin as soon as he leaves home. Pavements are almost non-existent in Kinshasa and streets are riddled with potholes.
Watch out, watch out! See, these are the things that make our lives a nightmare.
Olivier says he receives no help from the government and struggles to find work.
We want people with disabilities to be integrated into society because we really feel abandoned. And that's why 85% of disabled men and women have no choice but to beg on the streets.
According to local organisations, 1 in 8 Congolese people lives with a disability. But dedicated facilities are scarce and most of them are underfunded. In this school for the deaf, the headmaster says he receives less than 40 euros per term to buy teaching material. DR Congo appointed its first ever Minister for Disabled People 2 years ago. Irene Sambo herself lives with a disability. Earlier this year, she presented a bill to improve the lives of millions in the country, recommending the introduction of quotas in the public and private sectors.
There isn't a single MP with a disability in the National Assembly. The same goes for the Senate. One of the main challenges is the participation of people with disabilities in public decision-making.
The bill was passed by the National Assembly last month and is now under consideration by the Senate.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Take care.